Thank you, Graham, and thank you, Nancy, for the invitation. I'd also like to thank Katrina and Yuri for all the logistical organisation, and I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we meet and their elders and pay respects to their elders past and present. Thank you for being brave enough to ask a lawyer along. I was listening to Ken. I don't know that lawyers solve problems, traditional lawyers. I think they exacerbate problems. In the discipline scholar role, one of the big issues for us was looking at how you incorporate creativity in law. And I had a judge not quite yell, because I'm sure judges don't, but they certainly don't want creativity in their courts, they said. They don't want lawyers coming in and just making stuff up. So, we've got a way to go. So I hope I've got something of value to add here. What is a capstone? I'm going to look at why capstones, what capstone experiences, something about design principles, dilemmas and examples. You've got a copy of the PowerPoint. My interpretation of short and sharp is go hard, go fast and don't stop till you're finished, and then try and leave some time for Ruth. And I'm a word person, I'm sorry. I've tried to put some diagrams in, but there you go, that's the start of our discipline. When we think about the transitions that students make over the course of their student life cycle from entry to capstone, some colleagues at QUT did some interesting work looking at Bridges' model of organisational change and how to manage it, looking particularly from the human and the emotional aspect, and thought there were 3 concurrent phases, and then applied it to student transition over time. And these phases all need to be complete before students make the transition. And the interesting phase, I was going to do this with a pointer, but there are so many screens, I have to do it with the mouse instead. The interesting phase, of course, is the transition in the middle, where all the risks and opportunities are available to students, and they can engage and do that interesting work around making the transitions. And so, of course, what we're concerned about here is the transition out. But I think it might be useful for students when we're talking about capstones, and also thank you, Graham, for mentioning my love really is first year, talking to students about their transition into university, to acknowledge what's happening to them. And when we're looking at this still indeterminate zone, acknowledge that they've still got some pre-entry identity, they've got their student identity, and we're trying to form, which has already started, but enlarging a professional identity. The ALTC, again, they stopped. Their email's dead. There's no point emailing the ALTC anymore. Again, thank you very much. Financed 2 projects around capstone, one in the business discipline, and I'm not going to go to the 2 slides that I have there, but they're in your handout if you're interested, and then the one that I'm interested in law, where we have very little regard for capstones in Australia, so there's a lot of work for us to do. What is a capstone? Well, there's any large number of definitions about what a capstone is. I've just chosen one. Certainly a crowning something, subject, experience, unit. In fact, we've started talking about capstone experiences rather than subjects or units or programs, with the specific objective of integrating our body of relatively fragmented knowledge into a unified whole. It's a rite of passage, which I think that model from Taylor and his colleagues demonstrated, where students both look back and look forward and try to make sense, and then look forward to a new professional identity. I think we do need to start thinking about some models for capstone, so I don't present these as the ultimate, but I think as you are developing them in your various disciplines, here are some ideas. Magnet, that pull together learning from within a discipline, and that's probably where my discipline's coming from. A mountaintop idea where you're going to range across a variety of disciplines, so you're bringing, for example, engineering and architecture and IT, or a range of disciplines together. A mandate required by an outside authority, and I wonder in this environment whether TEQSA, the new quality agency, might be an outside authority for this purposes, but originally the Americans here are talking about the professional body that requires some demonstration of student achievement, and then a mirror where students look and reflect on the entirety of their experience. But as we've done some work under our project, as interesting and helpful as those various models might be, we've also thought about capstone as perhaps an integrated whole of program design, perhaps capstone as an individual subject of study, and in law, where we're so prescribed over the course of the whole degree, the last thing students really are ever wanting, and certainly my colleagues want, is another prescribed subject, but I think we might have to go there, sorry. And another perhaps more realistic thing in a discipline like ours, which is so prescribed, are various modules in various final year subjects. But what I'm particularly worried about, and I start most of my sentences with I'm very worried about, I'm worried about the fact that our students go like this all the way through the course of their degree, and we might jump them up to some sort of capstone experience, which is going to be very hard for them at the end of the degree. I'm sure you don't do that in your disciplines. So whatever we do in capstone, we need to ensure that students are prepared for engaging. So it would be nice if it was a gradual trajectory rather than a jump up. And so the idea of perhaps cornerstone subjects, just checking where they're at through the course, placed nicely through the course of the degree. This is envisaging that we've got a whole of program approach to degrees. And also gateway subjects where students are going into various majors. So again, we can just check where they're at. Why you might do capstones? Well, this is deep integrative work that has high impact, as George Koo and his colleagues in the US have demonstrated, and as if we didn't know that. But again, some educational theory around it. Probably the last three on the slide are traditionally the sorts of capstone type subjects or experiences students might have. Though the undergraduate research, which is also demonstrated and mentioned there, would pass, I think, as a capstone. Why capstones? I don't know whether I have to convince you. I'm a lawyer. I always like advocating arguments. Well, students in their final year face just as significant transitions as those commencing in their first year. Transition out, and often they're fighting with their colleagues for places in the workforce. So we've got to manage those transitions. The Australasian Survey of Student Engagement, with which a number of you would be familiar, that looks at what engages students in productive learning and compares what we do across various institutions with what is happening in the US. Only 2.7% of later year students across all disciplines in Australasia identify as having had a capstone experience, to be compared with 36.8% in the US, which is not great for the US, quite frankly. But anyway, who are the great kings of capstone and queens, I'm sure. But the fact that students would do that, would not identify that they're having capstone experiences, is an issue, and it might be some naming rights around that, but also I think we're not actually doing it that much. Certainly it's not common in legal education. It seems to be more common in other disciplines, but again, I'm having real difficulty ranging across the disciplines and trying to find some generic learnings from that might help. What might focus our minds more closely on capstone experiences is this recent focus through, as Graham mentioned, as a discipline scholar, though with the ALTC, it's about as useless to me as everything else I've done in my career, I suspect. But the recent focus on discipline standards and the requirement to demonstrate acquisition of program learning outcomes, whole of program learning outcomes. So if any of you looked at the TEQSA, the Tertiary Education Quality and Standards Agency discussion paper around teaching and learning standards, you will see at the 2 pages that I've identified there, specific mention of capstones as possibly meaningful points of assessment and certainly a mechanism for driving some demonstration of student acquisition of learning outcomes. So I think capstones are just about to come into their own, another thing I've lucked onto according to my colleagues. So there's TEQSA, and so this is a change from your slide because I found they've set up a website now from when I sent them through, and I thank again Katrina for copying those slides for you. The Australian Qualifications Framework, which you'd be pleased to hear, does actually have creativity in it as a program learning outcome for a level 7 bachelor's degree. That was why it was problematic for my discipline. I had to get creativity in there somehow. And I did have my law discipline standard statement as a picture, but it seems to be completely irrelevant to you here, so I've just left back in engineering and architecture, but of course creative and performing arts has also developed some statements, generic statements of program learning outcomes for your disciplines that satisfy the Australian Qualifications Framework. And there's an example which of course I don't have time to. This is the most recent example with which you might not be overly familiar, and in the architecture discipline that my colleague from QUT, Sue Savage, has just negotiated with her discipline, quite broadly written those terms, including the profession. What capstone experiences? This slide took a long time to put together, and it's very long. Any large number of things of capstone, and too many words. No diagrams, people. I've got a picture later on that might help. But it's very small. Research projects, project-based learning, problem-based learning, case studies, work-integrated learning. There's a bit of argy-bargy, Ken, around trying to not conflate work-integrated learning with Capstone. I think the principles might be different. So that's other unexplored area. Major Capstone events, performances, exhibitions, artworks, conferences, simulations, mentoring, career, e-portfolios, leadership programs. You know, there's a lot of creativity in what a capstone might be. In the US, again, our engineering colleagues might be well aware of this. There's a whole conference around capstone design, and the conference was specifically brought about because there was a lack of sharing of practice across the discipline as to what good practice might look like in this space. That special edition of the engineering, of Advances in Engineering Education, is specifically devoted to capstone and includes an article which I found very interesting, Where Are We Now? Stats on Capstone Courses Nationwide, which is a nice starting point. I'm struggling, I think a number of us are, to work out what it is that we should be doing in capstones. I'm just going to try and give you some examples now that might be relevant to in your various contexts. Mick Healy in the UK is running a project out of the Higher Education Academy, rethinking final year projects and dissertations, creative, there's a word, honours and capstone projects. I've got copies of this particular example, if anyone's interested. I'll put them out the front or here with Ken's material. Talking about a design dissertation and trying over time to make it more integrated with the studio practice. ANU has this very interesting, as of course ANU would, a capstone approach where they get or have a weekly 2-hour panel of different high-profile researchers looking at what complexity in different disciplines means. So across the whole of ANU, students coming together, having, it's a wonderful idea, isn't it? Investigating what this means. So something probably closer to home for a number of you is an example from Macquarie in the recording and performing discipline, mastery of specific vocal skills, students bringing together and synthesising their knowledge and honing their skills around a vocal performance in a studio with accompaniment and anticipating the audition process. And at my own institution, QUT, the entrepreneurial artist, I'm sorry, I've reverted now, as you can plainly see, to words, because I can't remember this. But again, I think a very interesting idea around introducing and examining entrepreneurial skills graduates need to identify and take advantage of employment as they go out into their disciplines. And in some of the newer disciplines, it's quite difficult for students to understand what the opportunities are. So the objectives, as you can look through them at your leisure, about explaining industry frameworks, displaying environmental scanning skills, leveraging networks, documenting their professional practice, producing a proposal. The assessment, of course, is where the rubber hits the road. So the assessment, again, in this subject, I think is quite interesting. For 50%, an individual environmental scan and strategy, identifying job opportunities and articulating strategies about moving towards their final career. You can start to see how this could be very capstone for students. And then a proposal for another 50% as a group about an opportunity for funding and documenting that. For those that are coming to the workshop this afternoon, I'll show a movie. That's very creative of me. It just required me to push a button, I think. About a stepping out conference that QUT has in its education faculty. It's a 3-day conference, and the conference is the resource for the capstone subject. A 3-day conference which includes a market day and provides access to employment options, publishing companies, support systems and professionals associations. There's keynotes, workshops, tutorials, and students are really thinking about what it is to become an educational professional. So Graham did helpfully introduce me for this. So under my ALTC fellowship, I was trying to conceptualise some theory around what we might be doing if we were trying to do serious transition work in the first year around curriculum design, and the curriculum would do all of those things, and I've referred you to a website if you're desperate to go and read off about that. But it did occur to me in the final year, we're still talking to a large extent about some sort of transition pedagogy, So rather than transition in, transition out to the world of work. We're also dealing with diversity in terms of students aren't necessarily coming in a linear process into their final year or capstone project, and they have diversity in destinations. Design has particular aspects relevant to the final year. The same with engagement. We of course would use engaging pedagogies, but now we're also looking, rather than just students and staff, we're probably looking to engage with careers and alumni. Assessment needs to be all those important things that assessment usually is, but specifically, and my colleague David Bowd would talk at length about this, for future learning and inculcating self and peer assessment, and of course evaluation, monitoring, and now with this other added aspect from the TEXA environment about assuring program learning outcomes. So you have, again, too many handouts, the work from our project around trying to identify some final year curriculum principles that support all those various things, LLL as lifelong learning and professional skills. But in developing a sense of professional identity, career planning and development, I mean, like the first year, I think, the capstone or final year bears a very heavy burden in this regard. So one of our reference group members, and I'm sorry, I know this is very law specific, and of course you would do all these things, but I like the last sentence in particular. This particular reference group member, feeding back on the articulation of the curriculum design principles, says we should have explicit language strongly encouraging teachers to develop experience that of course involve realistic or real life activities, place students in active roles requiring authentic responsibility for the results of their work, this is an interesting idea for a lawyer, developing moral reasoning and professional judgment. Although well-designed clinical and externship courses are paradigms of such, there are many other examples. And this is where we struggle. My institution, I became the Assistant Dean Teaching and Learning in my faculty and started being interested in the first year experience when we made 1,000 first year offers in law school. We can't do clinical and externship programs for all of our courses, so we're looking for other models, and that's where a number of us are struggling. Here's a picture. So this is a vibration damping platform, which I'm sure is a very good thing, that came out of that journal for the Engineering Association. So of course this is what engineers do, apparently. I'm married to one. They've designed things, fantastic things like this, and this would be their final year project. So it might be easier in some disciplines to conceptualise what it is that students might do as a whole project. But look at the range of other things before we start resorting to traditional approaches. Case studies and research grants and proposals, a thesis or dissertation, which could be team or individual or within a discipline or across disciplines, integrative or effective portfolios, culminating conferences and symposia, journals, websites, a creative product that is specific to the discipline, other traditional approaches. Beverly Oliver also has an Australian Learning and Teaching Council Fellowship. Beverly has had a long interest in e-portfolios. So again, the interesting idea here, and again the creative disciplines, you're way more across e-portfolios than disciplines such as law, again, for example. But e-portfolios in the capstone environment, I think, have the potential of collecting together evidence of acquisition of student learning outcomes over the course of the degree, which of course could feed into a particular subject of study or may not, as the case may be. So this is Beverly's diagrammatic, she's much better than me, representation of how you might require students to submit various aspects of the acquisition of their program learning outcomes over the course of their degree, which could feed into something different again. Some design and assessment issues, which is about where I'm finishing up. And I think we need to be very careful about this, supporting students and scaffolded preparation for capstone. And as regards support, it has been suggested that the studio critique teaching environment would be one of the best environments because it's less threatening for students to allow students to informally discuss their projects in that environment. But also it allows students to discuss common areas of concern amongst each other and allows them to see what other students are doing in that environment. And of course you would know that that's good learning for me. What particular learning outcomes of the whole program would the capstone actually demonstrate? And I think we need to be careful with that. We can't burden capstone with the responsibility for demonstrating the whole of the program learning outcomes. Workload for students and for staff, using supporting technologies. You see a lot of writing in the area around how we might use ICTs intelligently for this purpose. what do you do in the capstone unit? Are you lecturing or facilitating? And what is the content? What am I doing there? Assessment of course, in those various ways. This is quite extreme teamwork for students and for staff. So I think you need to anticipate again procedures for mediating inevitable issues around this. For example, and having my focus group of one at home, a girl doing engineering, it would be nice to have a team charge card for purchasing materials, for example, so we didn't have a whole team breakdown before we actually produced a vibration damping platform, if that's what you were inclined to be producing. And the risk management of the ethics and the OHS and the IP. So there's a lot of planning needs to go into that. So it didn't come up very well. That's just me trying to be creative. It is a juggling act, and I very keenly feel this. But here we go. Oops, I've ruined it. Sorry, but I think it could actually be quite stylish and simple in the end result, and certainly that's how we're going to have to present it to our students. Best I can do for a lawyer. And I'm done. Thanks.